have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 22nd of February 2020, and it's nice to have you with us once again as we are getting ready to dive right into all of the information and everything that's involved in our chaotic world here today. Happened to catch the Democrat debate this week. We're going to be getting into a little bit of that. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's really not relevant to the overall scheme of things, because I think the outcome of whatever the presidential election is going to be, it's going to be rigged, as it always seems to be. They're not going to let any real contest take place. The majority of the Democratic candidates are establishment candidates. And I say the majority because I do think, even though I do not want a Bernie Sanders presidency, I think that he is actually one candidate that the establishment certainly doesn't want. And nowhere do we see better an example of that than at the end of the last Democratic debate on Thursday, where they polled all the candidates. Chuck Todd asked them at the end of the debate whether they wanted the superdelegates to come in. Every single one of the candidates were fine with the process playing out without the superdelegates, except for Bernie Sanders. He was the only one that said the people should decide. The question was actually if this whole process happens and you don't have enough delegates, and he says there's a real possibility that all of you will not have enough delegates to win the nomination, should you go with the one that's the highest number of delegates? And Bernie Sanders was fine with that, and the rest of them were not. And I think that pretty much told the story as far as I was concerned. But, I don't want Bernie Sanders as president. I don't want any of these characters as president. But anyway, we'll get more into that as well as time progresses. And we have some incredibly outrageous legislation that we want to get to as well. Vicky Davis has a new article out, and so we're going to dissect that. So we have a lot to talk about. Hey, good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Yeah, there is a lot to talk about. The debate, I think, is probably the least of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. But this was actually one of the things that was very, well, it was entertaining, to say the least. It's one of these things.
Yeah, Michael-Bloomberg.
Yeah. Well, that's what's fun about it is watching him get Elizabeth Warren wiped the floor with this guy. I don't know if you heard about it at all, but she actually they were. I was actually waiting for them to start beating each other with chairs, because it would have been that would have been better, but. They wiped the floor with Bloomberg. All of them seemed to go out. He was very unprepared. He seemed very unprepared with all his money. Certainly, he couldn't. Here's an example.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. a billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg. Democrats are not going to win if we have a nominee who has a history of hiding his tax returns, of harassing women, and of supporting racist policies like redlining and stop and frisk. Look, I'll support whoever the Democratic nominee is, but understand this. Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another. This country has worked for the rich for a long time and left everyone else in the dirt. It is time to have a president who will be on the side of working families and be willing to get out there and fight for them.
Okay, so Bloomberg came off as a condescending billionaire. A good example is his response when he was pressured to release his tax returns.
I want to go to Mayor Bloomberg on this transparency issue. Very briefly on transparency, Mayor Bloomberg, your campaign has said that you would eventually release your tax records when it comes to transparency. But people are already voting now. Why should Democratic voters have to wait?
It just takes us a long time. Unfortunately or fortunately...
Can I comment on that?
Fortunately, I make a lot of money, and we do business all around the world, and we are preparing it. The number of pages will probably be thousands of pages. I can't go to TurboTax, but I put out my tax return every year for 12 years in City Hall. We will put out this one. It tells everybody everything they need to know about every investments that I make and where the money goes. And the biggest item is all the money I give away. And we list that, every single donation I make, and you can get that from our foundation anytime you want.
Okay, yeah, I'm just looking at my husband in the front row that has to, do our taxes all the time. We probably could go to TurboTax.
Yeah, it sounds very elitist and condescending. When I don't have to go to TurboTax like all you other people. So, go ahead.
He is an elitist.
Yes.
But
you're not supposed to sound like that when you want people who are not elitist to vote for you.
Well,
go ahead.
He's been active in the town that I'm in and giving donations to. He gave a big donation to a woman who started up a nonprofit just to take the donation. And what it was to produce a report for requirements that the town needed to take in more refugees.
Well, there you go.
I mean,
and we're going to get into a lot
our
of that.
town to be a welcoming community.
Yeah, well, and this is the problem with all of this stuff, is that why are these billionaires pushing the demise of our country? That's very apparent.
Very profitable.
It's very apparent. If you have no borders, you have no country. And we sound like a broken record. We've said it countless times on our broadcast here that you can't have a country without borders. And why are these people like George Soros and billionaires like this guy?
And the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
One of them died, but the other one is still on the loose.
Yeah, exactly. Not locked up yet. Anyway, the biggest failure of the night went to Bloomberg when he was blasted by Warren over having non-disclosure agreements with women who had been sexually harassed by him. She had him by the kahunas, and she wouldn't let go. It was hilarious to watch him. He was speechless. He was borderline speechless, and he had no response.
Let me ask you about something else. Several former employees have claimed that your company was a hostile workplace for women. When you were confronted about it, you admitted making sexually suggestive remarks, saying, quote, "That's the way I grew up." In a lawsuit in the 1990s, according to the Washington Post, one former female employee alleged that you said, quote, "I would do you in a second." Should Democrats expect better from their nominee?
Well, let me say a couple things, and if I can have my full minute and a quarter, thank you. I have no tolerance for the kind of behavior that the Me Too movement has exposed. And anybody that does anything wrong in our company, we investigate it, and if it's appropriate, they're gone that day. But let me tell you what I do in my company and my foundation and in city government when I was there. In my foundation, the person that runs it's a woman. 70% of the people there are women. In my company, lots and lots of women have big responsibilities. They get paid exactly the same as men.
And I hope you heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women. That just doesn't cut it. The mayor has to stand on his record. And what we need to know is exactly what's lurking out there. He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is
Let me
that?
finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me put, there's agreements between two parties that wanted to keep it quiet, and that's up to them. They signed those agreements, and we'll live with it.
So wait, when you say it is up to, I just want to be clear. Some is how many? And when you say they signed them and they wanted them, if they wish now to speak out and tell their side of the story about what it is they allege, that's now okay with you? You're releasing them on television tonight?
Senator? No.
Is that right?
Senator, the company and somebody else, in this case, a man or a woman, or could be more than that, they decided when they made an agreement that they wanted to keep it quiet for everybody's interest. They signed the agreements, and that's what we're going to live with.
I'm sorry. No, the question is, are the women bound by being muzzled by you? And you could release them from that immediately. Because understand, this is not just a question of the mayor's character. This is also a question about electability. We are not going to beat Donald Trump with a man who has who knows how many non-disclosure agreements and the drip, drip, drip of stories of women saying they have been harassed and discriminated against. That's not what we do as Democrats.
Go ahead.
That was brutal. She nailed him.
I mean, she was on fire, and I'm no fan of any of these people, but it's fun for the entertainment value. None of it's relevant, as we said, but it's fun to watch that guy because he's such a douchebag. It's kind of fun to get him.
He is a total slime ball.
And so,
and the money did not improve his character.
No, not at all. That's the thing. It can't buy you a personality either. But, and the thing is it's still relatively early, and he just jumped in the campaign, and the question is how many Democrats that are going to be voting, or even independents for that matter, are actually going to watch the Democratic debate. And that's the question. Will they see his campaign ads, and he's got a lot of money for campaign ads, versus, the debate? And I'm guessing there's probably a much smaller percentage that will actually see the debate. So how relevant is it?
I'm sure that the superdelegates will choose Michael-Bloomberg.
Well, that could very well be.
Because he bought the Democratic Party, the DNC. That's.
But see, here's the thing, Vicky. It doesn't really matter. If they choose Elizabeth Warren, she's tight with Hillary, the Clinton. She's establishment all the way. If they choose Pete Buttigieg, they've got we talked about how they got the Hillary for America people backing them. They've got all the Clintons. And the Democratic Party is controlled by the Clintons through the joint fundraising agreement we talked about a week or two ago. In 2015,
but
they signed it.
Clintons are done. They're finished.
I don't think so. I think they're still very relevant. Very relevant. And when you sign, if you read that joint fundraising agreement, that gives them the power to put all of their people inside the Democratic National Committee. They have the power to they're controlling the DNC. And that was signed back in 2015.
Yeah, but that's predicated upon the ability to put money into the DNC. Well, and that's where the Clintons lost power, is through their ability to raise funds.
I don't know.
And Bloomberg.
This could very well be, and Bloomberg may very well be putting weight to that. But my point here is, whether it's Bloomberg, whether it's anybody, pick a candidate, any candidate on that stage, other than Bernie Sanders. And it sounds like I'm not a Bernie Sanders fan. I want to make that clear. But he's the only one that it looks to me like that isn't one of the people that they have chosen. And isn't it interesting now that they're saying that Bernie Sanders is being helped by Russia? Russia is meddling in the election again in favor of Bernie Sanders. That's the claim now.
Yeah, it's always Russia, Russia, Russia.
Yeah, for all the candidates that they don't like. Mm-hmm. And isn't it funny how they can put forward all of these socialist ideas, but when a democratic socialist they don't like is running, then all of a sudden socialism is a bad thing. I think it's interesting too, and I won't play the clip, but Biden was heckled at the end for not, because during the Obama administration they supposedly deported 3 million people. So people in the crowd heckled Biden for that. But yeah, I'll leave that there. There was another clip I was going to play about Bernie Sanders responding to being a socialist, because he made a good point there about, he said, well, some of these, he says, we're largely already a socialist country. He says, let me just go ahead and play this last clip from the debate. He made a very good point here about socialism for the rich.
Senator Sanders, our latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll released yesterday, 2/3 of all voters said they were uncomfortable with a socialist candidate for president.
Let's talk about democratic socialism, not communism, Mr. Bloomberg. That's a cheap shot. We are living in many ways in a socialist society right now. Problem is, as Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us, we have socialism for the very rich, rugged individualism for the poor.
Wait a second.
Let me finish. When Donald Trump gets $800 million in tax breaks and subsidies to build luxury condominiums, that's socialism for the rich. When Walmart, we have to subsidize Walmart's workers who are on Medicaid and food stamps because the wealthiest family in America pays starvation wages. That's socialism for the rich. I believe in democratic socialism for working people.
Okay, so he goes on about the health care.
Yeah, I totally agree with him. And Trump's program of opportunity zones is the same damn thing.
That's right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's designed to benefit the investors.
The investors give slave wage jobs to the working people.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting, if you want an example about how anti-establishment, how the establishment views Bernie Sanders, listen to how the media treats him.
I thought it was a great night for Bernie Sanders. I thought it was a great night for Donald Trump. I thought it was a terrible night for the Democrats.
The truth is, Bernie Sanders is on a trajectory to be the Democratic nominee.
To me, I just don't see him having any shot in a general election. I'm panicked. I am absolutely panicked.
No one but Bernie, Stephanie. Come on. He's an anarchist. He would love to burn down the United States.
If we nominate a socialist like Bernie Sanders, we're going to lose. It'll be like George McGovern. It'll be a blowout.
Nobody just says the obvious. Bernie, you're full of it. They're just pandering to the Bernie people. And you know what pandering gets you? Nothing. It certainly doesn't get you respect.
Tom Perez needs to step down. He's a joke. He's a clown. He can't run the Democratic Party anymore. It's lost its way.
I don't see how Democrats do anything but bleed out when they put a socialist at the top of the ticket.
It is a death sentence for the party, and it will lead to Donald Trump's reelection.
The loser as Leslie put it, are the Democrats.
They've got to get out there and say, I disagree with socialism. I believe in the markets.
Right.
I think he's wrong. I think he'll never get it done. And in this country, we'll never go that direction. And by the way, we'll lose 49 states.
Corbyn didn't work in England. Bernie ain't going to work in the United States. Anyone but Bernie.
So what do you think of that? I mean, anybody but Bernie. They're in a panic because he's on his way. He's doing very well. So I think they're going to do, by hook or by crook, they're going to do whatever they have to do to make sure he doesn't get it. They stole it from him in 2016, and they're going to steal it from him again, no matter what they have to do.
Right. And what they do is they direct the conversation in such a way that they make it the idea of doing something to help working people as a dirty idea, and working people that work for a living think that's a dirty idea too, because they know they're going to have to pay for it. The thing is that they always redirect away from the wealthy, where all the benefits of socialism are going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and our religious and moral values say, you know, that we don't really, it's sinful to covet other people's wealth. But when you're talking about politics and about the incentives and how the system is structured, if all the benefits are going to the top 1 or 2% of the people, it's not really coveting the wealth of those people. It's saying, hey, you know, they have enough money. Let's redirect our laws in such a way that you give the working people, the average people out here that might want to start a business, give them a break.
Well, it's not even about giving us a break. It's about, you know, the problem is with the top 1 or 2%, I don't care what you make. I don't care what you have. The problem is when you have enough money that you're able to manipulate things, manipulate laws, like you say, and form monopolies and things, engineer things in such a way that the process is rigged against the average person, the average business owner, the average American that would try to make some money for themselves. You know, you've got things rigged in such a way that it's all fixed. It's all fixed.
Yes.
And there's a reason why the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And the middle class is disappearing.
Because they bought our political system. They bought our media. They bought everything. Yeah. You know, if I were queen for a day, I would take their money away from them, except for, you know, maybe leave them $20 million or something, and apply it all to the national debt.
Yeah. Well, that's not going to happen.
No. That was only on a TV program in the 1950s. Queen for a day.
It was nice. It would be nice. You know, I got one more political clip, and it's not from the debate. I just think this serves to this points out the double standard, which I'm so sick of the double standard. Amy-Klobuchar, she was on she was interviewed by some what was that, Telemundo, I think it was. I think it was Telemundo, that Spanish service, news media. And they asked her the name of the Mexican president. I don't know if you followed this or not. She couldn't name it.
What do you know about the Mexican president?
Okay, well, what I will tell you is that I will visit Mexico in the first 100 years. 100 days.
100 days.
I will visit there.
Are running for president. Yes. You would like to be the Democratic candidate.
Yes.
What do you know about the Mexican president now?
Well, I know that he is elected in the last few years. I don't know him personally. I've met with the ambassador, and I was actually supportive of the trade agreement. So I worked with the embassy on that. They came to meet with me.
And I ask because it's so important, especially Nevada, California, Arizona, Texas. This is our neighbor to the south.
Yes.
Do you know anything about him? Specifically his politics, what he's doing, since this would be the country you would share a border with? Anything you can tell me about him?
I know that they are neighbors, and regardless of who the leader is, that it is someone that I will work with.
Do you? I'm sorry to ask this, but do you know who he is? Do you know his name?
Yes. I know that he is the Mexican president.
But can you tell me his name?
No. So.
Don't you think it would be important, if you're running for president, to know who the president of Mexico, the country to the south of the United States, is?
Yes.
Because it affects so many Americans. Mexican Americans are the largest Hispanic, the largest number of Hispanics in the U.S. are Mexican Americans.
Of course it is, yes.
Is there anything specifically you can tell me that you do know about Andrés Manuel López Obrador or what he's doing in Mexico that has a direct effect on all of our border communities?
Well, what I do know is that we have had issues, of course, with asylum and people coming up. I actually visited Mexico under the previous president, yes. And went there and led a delegation there to work on human trafficking, and I met with the Attorney General at the time.
Okay, the only reason I bring this up is because it's painful to listen to. And, you know, it's easy to beat up on her and call her, a lot of people can call her names and everything. But you know what? Nobody knows everything. The problem I have with this is that, do you remember how they treated Sarah Palin when she didn't know something? The media was brutal. I mean, they were vicious. And they beat her up. And I'm no fan of Sarah Palin either. She's a huge communitarian. But the double standard in the media is just sickening, and I think this is why more and more Americans are tuning out.
Yeah. Well, I would have to question her thinking, her ability to organize and lead things. If she knows she's going on a program like Telemundo, and she didn't study everything she could find about Mexico, then, I'd have to say, what's wrong with that woman?
Well, she's used to softball questions from the media, and she thinks no matter, just by showing up, they're going to love her, they're going to worship her. Well, and he was very, very nice and polite, by the way. He apologized for asking the question. It's incredible.
I loved it. I thought
it was great. Yeah, exactly. Well, but the media won't. The larger media, they're not going to focus a lot on that. They're not going to focus a lot on it. Anyway, we got the bottom of the hour break. Stay with us. We'll be back.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
And we're back. This is Govern America. GovernAmerica.com is the website for the show. GovernAmerica.com. My email address is radio@governamerica.com, and Vicky Davis is here as well. Vicky, you want to give your information out?
Mm-hmm. My website is thetechnocratictyranny.com, and my older website is channelingreality.com, and my email address is on both websites, and either website that you get to, there is a link to the other one.
Very good.
So you can get back and forth between my older research and my newer research.
Yeah, and it's all very relevant. The old ties in with the new, and all of it is, and more coming out all the time. We got an article we're going to talk about today. Her new article is out, and I have the article right here printed out, Surrender of the Economy and Its Consequences. And so we're going to discuss that here in just a moment. But first I want to talk. I happen to catch, I've mentioned on the broadcast many times, I am a fan of Tucker Carlson at Fox News. There are not many Fox anchors that I like. And I don't get to watch all the time. First of all, I don't subscribe to cable, so anything I have to find online, and I have to do it quickly before YouTube deletes the videos, because they do that all the time. Often what they'll do is there'll be a whole show posted, and then within a few hours of it happening, YouTube will either delete the video or they will shorten it down to 1 or 2 seconds. Very odd. But they leave them up so that they still come up in the search results to basically frustrate anybody's efforts at searching for the show. But
I didn't realize they were doing that.
Yeah, I've noticed that several times, that they shorten it down to 1 or 2 seconds, but they leave them up. That seems to be a new strategy.
Oh, I did see a few videos that were like that, and I did think it was odd.
Yeah, I think it's the algorithm. It's the algorithm, and I think that's what they're doing to try to keep people from, when you go and search, those ones will come up, And you got countless ones like that until you finally give up. You figure they're all like that. So if you don't catch it right away, as soon as people upload them, you won't be able to watch. But I do like Tucker Carlson. I think he's genuine. I think he's sincere, and he talks about things that other hosts won't. He just did a piece the other night. In fact, I got it here, but I won't probably have time to play it today, about cell phones and 5G and how they're giving people tumors. It's incredible. I have a relative, I won't mention who, but I have a relative who just had to have a tumor removed from her brain. And her ordeal isn't over yet. They're claiming that it's going, it's coming. There's already another one growing there. These are very serious situations going on, but the larger media won't talk about it because they're funded by the cell phone companies. Verizon, AT&T, Sprint. They run ads on these big networks, and so they don't want to upset that commercial apple cart.
That is disgusting. I have noticed that there is an increase in brain tumors, and it's
well, when you figure you're dealing with when you're dealing with the cell phone companies, you're dealing with anything from 800 megahertz up. I mean, when you get into the gigahertz band, you're dealing with microwave. It's microwave.
Uh-huh. So they're frying our brains.
They're literally frying your brain. When you hold that thing to your phone, or the phone to your head, you're heating up your brain. I mean, this is like the Joe Camel cigarette situation of the 21st century. Back when cigarettes were, people were smoking cigarettes left and right, and it was something that everyone kind of knew that this was probably not good for you. Well, plug that into the cell phone usage today. I think a lot of people kind of know, although maybe they don't know because it doesn't get talked about in the media. But anyway, I didn't mean to go down that bunny trail. I was talking about Tucker Carlson. I happened to catch his show, and the only reason I did is because the debate was so fun that I thought, I'd like to see what Tucker's take on it was. So I sought out his show for, I think it was Thursday night. And he happened to mention a piece of legislation called the New Way Forward Act. And he said the New Way Forward Act would turn the entire country into a sanctuary city. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I meant to write it down, and I didn't. And later on, so I went to do more show prep later on, and I got thinking, well, I wonder what was that bill that Tucker was talking about. And I did some digging and searching around. Finally, I stumbled across not the clip from that show, but from a previous show where he did more of a deep dive into this New Way Forward Act. Vicky, this is unbelievable. I got the bill here. I went through the whole bill and highlighted it, parts of it. But I'm going to let Tucker. This is a little bit long of a clip. I think it's about 4 or 5 minutes. But you've got to hear this, and then I'll share a little bit from the bill. This is, and it's right in your wheelhouse. I mean, this deals with the migrant situation. This New Way Forward Act. Basically, what it really boils down to, if this bill was passed, and there's a bunch of Democrats that have signed on to it as co-sponsors, I mean, we're essentially not going to have any borders whatsoever.
Yeah, well, that's been the objective.
Yes.
They just haven't talked about it as such, but the blending or the disintegration of borders actually began in 1983 with the signing of the La Paz Treaty.
Yes.
And that was the first real tangible step towards disintegration of our borders.
And it's a bipartisan thing.
Yeah,
it's a bipartisan effort. Okay, here's Tucker Carlson recently on his show talking about the New Way Forward Act.
Crime and violence are the clearest possible signs that a society isn't functioning as it should. If they increase to a certain point, societies don't function at all, and we should be worried about that always. We ought to be doing all that we can to build a place, a country where people who follow the law are rewarded, those who flout it are punished, and above all, children can live in peace and safety. That used to be obvious. It's not obvious anymore. At this moment, there's a bill pending in the Congress called the New Way Forward Act. It's received almost no publicity, and that's unfortunate, as well as revealing. The legislation is sponsored by 44 House Democrats, including Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's roughly 4,400 words long. That means it's almost exactly as long as the U.S. Constitution. Like the Constitution, it's designed to create a whole new country. The bill would entirely remake our immigration system with the explicit purpose of ensuring that criminals are able to move to the United States and settle here permanently with immunity. Now, you may think we're exaggerating for effect, but we're not exaggerating, not even a little bit. The New Way Forward Act is the single most radical piece of legislation we have ever seen proposed in this country, ever. It makes the Green New Deal look like the status quo. A document produced by Democrats to promote the bill says this, and we're quoting it verbatim. Convictions should not lead to deportation, end quote. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about convictions for double parking or even for DUI. The bill targets felony convictions, serious crimes that could send you to prison for years, and should. A press release from Congressman Jesus Garcia of Illinois is explicit about this. Garcia brags that the bill will break the, quote, prison to deportation pipeline, something most of us were for. So how does the bill do that? Well, under current U.S. law, legal U.S. immigrants can be deported if they commit a, quote, aggravated felony or a crime of moral turpitude, that is a vile, depraved act like molesting children. Under the New Way Forward Act, crimes of moral turpitude are eliminated entirely as justification for deportation. And the category of aggravated felony gets eliminated too. So what does that mean? Consider this. Under current law, immigrants who commit serious crimes, robbery to fraud to child sexual abuse, must be deported regardless of the sentences they receive. Other crimes, less severe ones like racketeering, require deportation if the perpetrator receives at least a 1-year sentence. Under this bill, there would no longer be any crime that automatically requires deportation. None. And one crime, falsifying a passport, would be made immune from deportation no matter what, because apparently 9/11 never even happened, and we no longer care about fake government documents. By the way, if you just renewed your driver's license to comply with the Real ID Act, you must feel like an idiot, because immigrants are getting a pass, you're not. Under the proposed legislation, for crimes that would still allow deportation, the required prison sentence would rise from 1 year to 5 years. We checked the Bureau of Justice statistics. According to federal data, crimes like car theft, fraud, and weapons offenses all carry average prison sentences of fewer than 5 years. And that's just looking at averages. There are people who commit rape, child abuse, even manslaughter, and get sentences with fewer than 5 years. Lots of them, actually. If the New Way Forward Act passes, immigrants who commit those crimes and receive those sentences would remain in this country. And, of course, they will be eligible for citizenship day one, too, of course. But even that is understating the law's effect. Even a 5-year prison sentence wouldn't necessarily be enough to trigger deportation. The bill would grant sweeping new powers to immigration judges, allowing them to nullify a deportation order. The only requirement for that is, quote, the immigration judge finds such an exercise of discretion appropriate in pursuant of humanitarian purposes, to assure family unity, or when it is otherwise in the public interest. Talk about open-ended. In other words, anti-American immigration judges, and there are a lot of those in this country, would have a blank check to open the borders. You would not be voting on this. It would happen anyway. Is this shocking you yet? Because we're just getting started. We read this proposed legislation. Here's another point. Current U.S. law makes drug addiction grounds for deportation because why wouldn't it? This bill would eliminate that statute. Current law also states that those who have committed drug crimes abroad or, quote, any crimes involving moral turpitude are ineligible to immigrate here. The New Way Forward Act abolishes that statute. So a Mexican drug cartel leader could be released from prison, then freely come to America immediately. And if he wants, he could come here illegally, and it still wouldn't be a crime because, and you were waiting for this part, the bill also decriminalizes illegal entry into America, even by those we've previously deported. In other words, you break our law, we send you out, you come back, you break it again, you can stay. According to a document promoting this bill, criminalizing illegal entry into America is, quote, white supremacist. That's a quote, white supremacist. Now, by this point, you're beginning to wonder, are we making this up? We're not making it up. In fact, we're barely halfway through the bill. The legislation doesn't just make it harder to deport illegal immigrants who commit crimes. It doesn't just make it easier for criminals to move here illegally, though it does both. The bill would also effectively abolish all existing enforcement against illegal immigration. To detain illegal immigrants, ICE would have to prove in court that they are dangerous or a flight risk. But of course, ICE wouldn't be allowed to use a detainee's prior criminal behavior as proof of danger. That's banned. ICE would have to overcome even more hurdles if the detainee claims to be gay or transgendered. If they're under 21 or if they can't speak English and an interpreter isn't immediately available, they get a pass. In other words, it would be much harder to arrest an illegal alien in this country than it is to arrest you. They're the protected class here. You're just some loser who's paying for it all. But believe it or not, we saved the nuttiest part of this legislation for last, and here's what it is. What could be more destructive than changing U.S. law specifically to allow rapists, child molesters, and drug dealers to stay in America? How about this? Using taxpayer money to bring deported criminals back into America. That's right. This bill would not only abolish your right to control who lives in your country, but it invents a brand new right. Quote, the right to come home. It orders the government to create a, quote, pathway for those previously deported to apply to return to their homes and families in the United States, as long as they would have been eligible to stay under the new law. It's retroactive, in other words. DHS must spend taxpayer dollars transporting convicted criminal illegal aliens back into the United States. I'm not making this up. So who would be eligible for these flights? Tens of thousands of people we kicked out of this country for all kinds of crimes. Sexual abuse, robbery, assault, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, human trafficking. From 2002 to 2018, 480,000 people were deported for illegal entry or re-entry into America. And under this bill, you'd have to buy each of them a plane ticket to come home. Those tickets alone would cost about $1 billion. And that's before Democrats make you start paying for these criminals free health care, too, which they plan to do and have said so. The New Way Forward Act fundamentally inverts every assumption you have about this country. Under this legislation, the criminals are now the victims. Law enforcement is illegitimate. It's racist, just like the country you live in, just like you are. And the only solution is to get rid of both. America would be better off as a borderless rest stop for the world's predators and parasites. That's the point of this. And we're not overstating. Go read it. This is a big deal. This is not a small thing. This is not renaming a post office. It's hard to believe any American would put these ideas on paper, much less try to pass them into law. And yet, remarkably, that's happening. And even more remarkably, the press has ignored it. This isn't happening in secret. It's happening in the House of Representatives. Scores of Democrats have backed this bill. But the legislation has not been mentioned in the New York Times, hasn't been mentioned on CNN, a news channel, or even in self-described conservative outlets like National Review. No mention. Consider if this were working the other way. If a lone, Republican state legislator from Minot, North Dakota had proposed a bill this extreme that would remake America completely, the president himself would be expected to answer for it. CNN would demand that he disavow it, even if he'd never heard of it before. But when 1/5 of the entire Democratic caucus backs a bill demanding that you import illegal alien felons and then pay for it, it's a non-event in the American media. They don't think you should know about it. And that's dangerous, if we're being honest. Whether the press cares or not, these are the stakes of the 2020 election, and you have a right to know what they are. A growing wing of the Democratic Party views America itself as essentially illegitimate, a rogue state in which everything must be destroyed and remade. Our laws, our institutions, our customs, our freedoms, our history, our values. And of course, that's the point of all of this. An entirely new country in which resistance is crushed and they're in charge forever.
So that's the clip. The legislation is H.R. 5383. I'm aware we have a caller on the line. Just hang with us, caller. We'll get to you as quickly as possible. This bill, again, the New Way Forward Act, H.R. 5383, Title I of the bill says, in mandatory detention and require probable cause for arrest. Phase out of private for-profit detention facilities and use of jails. It says, beginning on the date of the enactment of this act, the Secretary of Homeland Security may enter into or extend any contract with any public or private for-profit entity that owns or operates a detention facility for use of that facility to detain aliens in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security, and shall terminate any such contract not later than the date that is 3 years after the date of the enactment of this act. Beginning on that date, on the date that is 3 years after the date of the enactment of this act, any facility at which aliens in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security are detained shall be owned and operated by the Department of Homeland Security. Skipping down here to Section 102, they talk about arrest, detention, and release. On a warrant issued by an immigration judge or pursuant to Section 287, the Secretary of Homeland Security may arrest an alien and, in accordance with this section, may, pending a decision on whether the alien is to be removed from the United States, detain the alien or release the alien on bond subject to conditions or on the alien's own recognizance. Now, how ridiculous is that? That's very what?
Because very clever of them to put that in there, because that will be the selling point for the legislation.
That's exactly right.
And as a policy matter, that would be a policy that I would support 100%, but not included in a bill like that allows felons and criminals to come into our country illegally.
Well, the key here is that they say on a warrant issued by an immigration judge. So that's a shift. I mean, right now can't ICE arrest illegal aliens now without a warrant? I think they can if they find out they're an illegal alien. So,
yeah, if they catch them, yeah, I would think so. I don't know. I don't know.
So it requires them to get a warrant.
ICE.
It requires them to get a warrant for this. Anyway, they go on. They say this section shall not apply to an unaccompanied alien child. Such an alien shall be transferred to the custody of the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Just going on here, just to touch upon a few of the things I've highlighted. Under the heading of custody and bond determinations, if the Secretary determines that the release without conditions of the alien will not reasonably assure the appearance of the alien as required or will endanger the safety of any other person in the community, the custody determination under this paragraph will impose the least restrictive conditions. If an alien seeks to challenge the initial custody, see, this gives the alien rights to challenge. If it seeks to challenge an initial custody determination under paragraph 1, the alien shall be provided with the opportunity for a hearing before an immigration judge to determine whether the alien should be detained. Number 3, presumption of release. In a hearing under this subsection, there shall be a rebuttable presumption that the alien should be released. The government shall have the duty of rebutting this presumption by clear and convincing evidence based on credible and individualized information that establishes that the use of alternatives to detention will not reasonably assure the appearance of the alien at removal proceedings, or that the alien is a threat to another person or the community.
That flips the burden, doesn't it?
That's absolutely right. The burden is upon the government to prove. It's unbelievable, this legislation. The fact that the alien has a prior conviction or a criminal charge pending against the alien may not be the sole factor to justify the continued detention of the alien.
Yeah. You know what? We need to bring back the a committee on un-American activities, because
I agree.
That piece of legislation, I don't think there could be anything more un-American than that.
Yeah, and every person that signed their name to this in Congress, that should be the evidence against them, that they're seditious and treasonous. If an immigration judge determines pursuant to a hearing, this is under the heading of least restrictive conditions required. If an immigration judge determines pursuant to a hearing under this section that the release without conditions of an alien will not reasonably assure the appearance of the alien as required, or will endanger the safety or any other person or the community, The immigration judge shall order the least restrictive conditions or combination of conditions that the judge determines will reasonably assure the appearance of the alien. So the judge has all kinds of leeway here, and we know these judges are almost universally in the tank for destroying our country.
Do you know what? What that does, it's not just Mexico that we're talking about here. This is all illegal aliens.
That's
so
right.
What they're doing, they're setting up a magnet for all the criminals all over the world to come to the United States as in a protected status.
Yes. You're absolutely right.
God.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. This I was listening to Tucker, and then I went through the bill. I'm holy moly, this is unbelievable. Now you can say, well, more than like this is so outrageous it'll never pass. But you have a huge number of Democrats that have signed on to this bill. Now it may not pass, and Trump may veto it if it ever gets to his desk. That could very well be. I wouldn't count on anything. But I couldn't see Trump allowing this to become law because this would be so detrimental if he did to his presidency. But you got to keep in mind, the election's right around the corner. And if Trump's defeated, this could very well be something that they're pushing through.
Well, Trump has said he would do things that he hasn't done. I don't think Trump is really trustworthy.
Well, I don't think any of them are trustworthy.
Anything that he says, I don't think is trustworthy. You have to wait and watch and see what he does. But in this case, would be so disastrous. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, well, I don't trust the Republicans either in Congress, and I'm not suggesting that we should trust any of them. I think that the USMCA proves that destroying America is a bipartisan effort. But this is such an extreme departure of everything we've had, and they push comprehensive immigration reform. Is this what they're talking about when they're pushing comprehensive immigration reform? That's the question I have.
It would seem so, huh?
I'll tell you what, we got the break coming up. I want to take the break, and I got a few more things I want to share from this bill. Because I think this is worthy of the time. This is a revolution we're talking about here.
And they're setting it up to do it legally.
Absolutely. Without a shot being fired, ladies and gentlemen. Your country's being taken from you without a shot having ever been fired. All right, we're at the top of the hour. Hour number 2 of Govern America. Straight ahead, Vicky Davis, Darren Weeks, and you. We'll be back in a moment.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order. New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America, hour number 2. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It continues to be the 22nd of February, 2020. As we get right back into it, talking about the New Way Forward Act. This is a bill that we were sharing that Tucker Carlson was talking about, H.R. 5383, the New Way Forward Act, which completely revamps the system of laws that we've had in this country to enforce illegal alien, or the handling of illegal aliens that come into our country.
This is not law. This is anarchy.
Yeah, this is the elimination of law.
If you invite criminals, if you set up a magnet for the world's worst criminals, then it's anarchy.
Well, and that's what they're doing here is going to do exactly what you said. It's going to cause a flood of illegals. It's designed to do that. A flood of illegals into our country, and if you want to clear evidence that the goal is completely and totally destroy this country, I mean, you can't get anything more glaringly clear than what we have before us here right now.
That's right.
They're talking about here special rule for vulnerable persons and primary caregivers. In a case in which an alien who is the subject of a custody determination under the subsection is a vulnerable person or a primary caregiver, the alien may not be detained unless the government shows, in addition to requirements under paragraph 3, that it is unreasonable or not practicable to place the individual in a community-based supervision program. Definition, now they give the definitions of what a vulnerable person is. This is what Tucker was talking about. A vulnerable person is a person under the age of 21 or over the age of 60, is pregnant, identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or intersex, is victim or witness of a crime, has filed a non-frivolous civil rights claim in federal or state court, has a serious mental or physical illness or disability, has been determined by an asylum officer in an interview conducted under Section 235 to have credible fear of persecution or a reasonable fear of persecution under Section blah, blah, blah of Title 8, Code of Federal Regulations, has limited English language proficiency. Now, don't all of them have limited English language proficiency? See, every single one of these, they'd fall into at least one category, has been determined by an immigration judge or the Secretary of Homeland-Security to be experiencing severe trauma or to be a survivor of torture or gender-based violence based on information obtained during intake from an alien's attorney or legal service provider through credible self-reporting. Go ahead, Vicky.
In about 2006 or 7, in the Idaho legislature, they put through some new rules for the schools declaring that children who did not speak English were at risk. And they set up a whole full boatload of social services and benefits for the, quote, children at risk. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just letting them into the country, it's that they will be given the whole, socialist state definition of benefits to for people at risk. So they'll be, oh my God, I can't believe they're putting this in.
It is unbelievable.
This will be the end of the country.
Absolutely.
End of story.
If
the country,
if they get it passed,
and it will be a war on Americans.
If they get it passed, it is a war. It's not. It will be. It is a war on Americans. I don't want to be partisan here because again, there's enough blame for the destruction of our country to go around. But there is an extremist element to the Democratic Party that is unbelievable. They don't even care to act. At least the Republicans, they pretend to be patriotic. They pretend to do the right thing for our country. This extremist element of the Democratic Party, and they're moving the entire Democratic Party in that direction by their extremism, They don't have the pretense anymore. They've taken it off.
Right, you're right.
The Secretary of Homeland Security shall establish programs that provide alternatives to detaining aliens, which shall offer a continuum of supervision mechanisms and options, including community-based supervision programs and community support. Skipping way down, because I'm trying to do this quickly. A conviction of aggravated felony for purposes of Clause 2 of subparagraph A, or any, and they give another section, or any other provision of this act, only an alien who has been convicted of an aggravated felony for which a term of imprisonment of not less than 5 years was imposed shall be considered to have been convicted of a particularly serious crime. They talk about restore judicial discretion and end removal without due process. An immigration judge, again, giving the judge all the discretion, an immigration judge may grant any relief or deferral from removal, including withholding.
You know what? If the Republicans were patriotic, as they pretend to be, rather than just the flip side of the Democrats,
right,
what they would do is eliminate that language in the law requiring court hearings on deportation. They would have let ICE just, if you're in the country illegally, get the hell out. Deport them. Get rid of them. Well,
I want to know where the Attorney General is and why aren't more of these people being rounded up? To hell with what the media says. But, Barr has come out and made some noises against Trump with regard to the Roger Stone thing. Roger Stone, by the way, sentenced over 3 years in prison, 40 months. And now the media is going up against Trump as far as they're saying they're going to investigate. The Congress, the Democrats in Congress are saying they're going to investigate pardons that Trump has. So the fix is in. Anyway, I don't want to get off track. They say...
it kind of seems like Roger Stone was used as kind of a trap for Trump.
Yeah.
Because George Webb said he has evidence, there is evidence out there that Randy Credico actually was the backdoor Julian Assange's connection.
Yeah, I would be careful.
Whatever it was, I forget the exact story, but it was Randy Credico, not Roger Stone, and there is video evidence and lots of people because it was at a party.
Yeah, I don't know.
Where Randy Credico said he was the guy.
I don't know about George Webb and his claims.
Well, but I don't know. He was pretty sure about this, and he's the only reporter that I know of that actually went to the hearings, the trial of Roger Stone.
Well, okay, but I just there's been other claims that have not been. I just say take it with a grain of salt unless you see documentation. But anyway, an immigration judge may or may not. An immigration judge may grant any relief for deferral from removal, including withholding of removal, to any individual who is otherwise eligible for such relief, but for a prior criminal conviction, or the commission of, or a fine. Now I would say, entering our country is a criminal act under present immigration laws. Without being, if you're not supposed to be here, you're breaking the law by coming in, and that's what everybody seems to be overlooking here. Conveniently,
right?
So.
And where is the Department of Justice? Where is home scam security?
They're AWOL.
That's why I call them home scam security, because it's all BS.
Yeah, or the commission of or a finding of the commission of other conduct described in Section 212. If the immigration judge finds such an exercise of discretion appropriate in pursuit of humanitarian purposes, Vicky, to assure family unity, or when it is otherwise in the public interest. So they have complete and absolute discretion to determine whether or not somebody stays. They talk in Title V of this act, prohibiting against performance of immigration officer functions by state and local officers and employees. They say the officers and employees of any state or any political subdivision of a state are prohibited from performing the function of an immigration officer in relation to the investigation, apprehension, transport, or detention of aliens in the United States or otherwise assist in the performance of such functions. So this is an absolute power grab by the federal government against those states that would try to enforce the borders, and go against what they're doing here.
Right. They always
enforcing immigration law.
It always seems to be that they raise the decision-making power above the people who are actually responsible for carrying out the function, and then they tie their hands so they can't do the job that they're supposed to do.
Yeah, civil immigration warrants shall not be made available to the officers or employees of any state or any political subdivision of a state through the National Crime Information Center database or its incorporated criminal history databases. Federal, state, and local law enforcement officials are prohibited from entering into the National Crime Information Center database or its incorporated criminal history databases information that relates to an alien's immigration status, the existence of a prior removal, deportation, or voluntary departure entered against any alien or any allegations of civil violations of the immigration laws. Any information described in this paragraph that is in the National Crime Information Center database shall be removed from such database not later than 90 days after the enactment of the New Way Forward Act.
You know what? The police better figure it out pretty damn quick that the real criminals are the ones that are in Congress.
Yes.
They're the criminals. And it's the police whose lives are in danger because they are on the front lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Skipping down again, I mean, there's so much I've highlighted here. I could go through it. We could probably do a whole show on this.
Man.
Title VI.
I don't know if my blood pressure could handle it.
I knew this would get you. Title VI, decriminalize migration. Vicky, that's what the Title VI is, decriminalize migration. Section 601.
Legalize so that every dirtbag criminal mental case in the entire world can come here to the United States and we'll support them. Until they kill us, that is.
Repealing migration criminal laws. Criminal penalties for entry at improper time or place of the Immigration and Nationality Act is repealed. Criminal penalties for reentry. Section 276 of the Immigration and Nationality Act is repealed. Title VII, right to come home. Considering and reopening immigration cases. This is the punchline, and this is, again, go ahead.
I wonder if that's the same thing that they did to Israel, the right of return for the Palestinians, because that just sounds real familiar with the right of return for the Palestinians. Well, is that what the deal the Saudis made?
No, the difference is
did they set up incentive for every criminal?
Israel is Palestinian land, and that was taken from them by the United Nations.
I understand that, but when they did set up the Israeli state, is that the deal that was made to make it a magnet, the right of return, to make it a magnet for every criminal? I'm talking about the patterns, not the politics.
Yeah, I don't know. Reconsidering and reopening immigration cases. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Attorney General shall grant a motion to reconsider or reopen proceedings pursuant to paragraph 6 or 7 if Section 240 of the Immigration and Nationality Act with respect to any alien who, on or after April 24th, now this is the part that Tucker was saying, this is huge. With respect to any alien who, on or after April 24th, 1996, they go back that far, 1. Was ordered, removed, departed, or excluded, or 2. Departed the United States pursuant to a grant of voluntary departure under Section 240B of the Immigration and Nationality Act, regardless of whether or not the alien was ordered removed, deported, or excluded, and B, demonstrates that the alien would not have been considered inadmissible, excludable, or deportable under the immigration laws of the Immigration and Nationality Act if this act and the amendments made by this act had been in effect on the date on which such order was issued on the voluntary departure or the voluntary departure took place, or would have been eligible to apply for relief from removal, deportation, or exclusion under such laws if this act and the amendments made by the act had been in effect on the date on which such order was issued or the voluntary departure took place, and 2, shall deem an alien who makes the demonstration under paragraph 1b as not having been removed, deported, excluded, or departed, and as not having failed to depart under a voluntary departure order for all purposes under the Immigration and Nationality Act. And then they
First thing we need to do is hang all the lawyers.
Well, they say now this is the part that he was talking about that is just the most insane, off the chart. It's transportations, paragraph D. The Secretary of Homeland Security shall provide transportation for aliens eligible for reopening or reconsideration of their proceedings under this section at government expense to return to the United States for further immigration proceedings, and shall admit or parole the alien into the United States. So
you've got to love that. That is so perfectly evil.
Yes.
You know, you pay for the transportation for the monsters that are going to be coming into the country.
To murder
you. Feed them. You pay for their housing. You give them everything that you have.
Yeah, to murder you and to rape your wife and children or whatever, you know.
Yeah, just surrender to all of the criminals that will be coming into the.
It makes you speechless. It makes you speechless. Finally, I'll read this. Any denial of a motion to reopen or reconsider submitted pursuant to this section is subject to de novo judicial review in a federal district court having jurisdiction over the applicant's residence, or in the case of an applicant who was removed from the United States, the last known residential address of the applicant in the United States. So that's H.R. 5383, ladies and gentlemen, the New Way Forward Act, which I think should be called the New World Order Act, because that's what it's designed to completely destroy the United States. And why would they want to destroy the United States, Vicky? Because a free America, a free United States, is obviously a hindrance to the world order.
Yeah.
You can't have sovereign countries, and especially not ones with freedom. Especially not ones that have the ability to have people who are prosperous and free and have gun rights. You can't have that in the New World Order. You got to have a defenseless, victim-filled population of slaves, serfs, people who do as they're told or else.
Yeah, dumbed down.
Yeah.
The dumber the better.
All right, if anybody's got anything to say, 610-600-1776. We're going to get to Vicky's article here in just a moment. I wanted to spend some time on that because, for obvious reasons. I think you know why it's so important.
It was worth the time, but
oh my gosh,
boy, you got me upset.
Yeah, it got me upset. I'm my jaw's on the floor as I was reading through this. Anyway, let's go to the phones, 610-600-1776, or toll-free 844-646-8376. That's 844-6-GOVERN. All right, first up is South Carolina. Hello, you're on the air.
No, I'm in Georgia. I don't know what it is. Something about Skype always wants.
Caller ID. You gotta love it.
Somewhere else.
Anyway, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, I use Skype, so Skype reroutes everything.
That's fine.
Like hiding behind a wall, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I put together a little document on this New Way Forward Act, so I'm just going to actually just read what's here, and we'll go from there. Roughly 4,400 words, almost exactly as long as the Constitution. And like the Constitution, this legislation is designed to create a whole new country. The bill would entirely remake the immigration system with the explicit purpose of ensuring that criminals are able to move here, settle here permanently without impunity. According to many Democrats who promote the bill, convictions should not lead to deportation. Keep in mind we're not talking about convictions for double parking, because this bill targets felony convictions and serious crimes that send you to prison for years. According to a press release from Jesus Garcia, Democrat of Illinois, who put together this bill, the bill will break the prisoner deportation pipeline. How does it do that? Under current U.S. law, legal U.S. immigrants can be deported if they commit an aggravated felony or a crime of moral turpitude, such as robbery, fraud, or a vile, depraved act such as child sex abuse, and less severe crimes like racketeering, which require deportation as long as the perpetrator receives at least 1 year in prison. Under the New Way Forward Act, crimes of moral turpitude are eliminated entirely as a justification for deportation, and the category of aggravated felony gets circumscribed as well. Now, what this means is a drug cartel leader could be released from prison and then come to America illegally if he wanted to, and it would not be a crime because you're waiting for this bill, which also decriminalizes illegal entry into America, even by those previously deported. If this
worse than that, because he becomes part of a protected class.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, we already know, we've heard many, including some who are in the race for presidency, we've already heard several of them talk about eliminating ICE, eliminating Customs and Border Patrol. I mean, they literally are trying to turn us into a third world country.
And I have a feeling that there are a lot of Democrats that are not on board with this either. And that's the surprising thing about it, is how tone deaf they are. I'm talking about mainstream average Joe and Jill America out there that listen to this. I mean, they might be involved, they might be on board with the progressive agenda in certain cases, but hey, a lot of these people still have jobs, and a lot of these people have still seen their jobs taken away by migrants coming in, and so I got a feeling, in many cases, they're kind of they're alienating their base. Why would they want to flood the country? Well, if they can get them in, if they can get all these migrants, these foreigners, these aliens coming in, these people are all going to be voting Democrat.
Yeah, so you're right. You're right. It doesn't matter if they alienate their American base of support, because our country will suddenly be flooded with an all new base of support.
Yeah.
Wow.
That seems to. So there's a big incentive for them to do this politically, but you know the net effect of it all is that they're absolutely going to destroy our country. And it's just astounding to watch all this develop. Anyway,
yeah, I agree with you. It's unbelievable.
Go ahead.
Well, this bill was introduced by Jesus Garcia, Pramila Jayapal, I hate these names, Ayanna Pressley, and Karen Bass. Currently has 44 House Democrats sponsoring, also including AOC, Ilhan Omar. I mean, this is, and they're claiming this is in the pursuit of racial and immigrant justice.
Now, I'm kind of curious, Art, where did you hear about this bill? Because I just found out about this maybe a couple of nights ago. Did you, I
learned about this almost 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's...
And I found it on CaliforniaGlobe.com.
Okay. Well, I wonder how many people know about it. Because I got a feeling it's not being widely talked about.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. It's nuts.
Well,
agenda.
Yeah, exactly. And they're certainly taking the gloves off, and they're showing themselves for what they are. Hey, I appreciate the call. Thank you very much.
All right, y'all have a great one.
You too. Blessings to you. All right, there he is, Art, in Georgia, not South Carolina. Well, you never know when you're using Skype, I guess, to call. You never know what it's going to say you're calling from. But anyway, this is nasty stuff, folks. And I encourage you to look up the bill and then contact your members of Congress and let them know exactly what's going on. How you feel about this. Again, this I'm thinking. I don't think we should be lured into a false sense of security on this. It's hard for me to imagine, at least with the Republicans controlling one house of Congress, this actually being passed and certainly allowed to continue to become law, or certainly signed into law by the president. Again, I don't trust any of these characters, but this is such a radical legislation. But every single time, you remember, Vicky, the whole time Obama was president, how he constantly was pushing for comprehensive immigration reform?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, is this not comprehensive immigration reform? And I hear Republicans talking about this as well.
Which proves the point that you need to get them to define what they mean by words.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is definitely would be the destruction of our country, no question about it. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll take the break and we'll continue. Stay with us. Govern America continues here. Don't go away.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
All right, we're back. This is Govern America, already to the halfway point of the show. As we continue here, I wanted to do a quick. Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, Mike Bloomberg is saying that he will charge Americans with domestic terrorism for hate crimes if he's elected. This comes from Information Liberation. Billionaire presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg said he will charge Americans with domestic terrorism for hate crimes if elected, and bashed nativists in America before affirming his commitment to Israel remaining a Jewish state in a recent interview with Jewish Telegraphic Agency.
Hey, you know what? Hate crimes are, that is a political offense. It's not a, we already have criminal laws on the books. If you hurt somebody, doesn't matter what color they are, you're criminally liable for hurting them.
Yes.
So when they add hate to it, that's a political crime. So
and it may or may not speak to motive, but the point is that, as you say, if somebody commits a murder or somebody commits an act of violence, that is what it is. I mean, based upon what you do to somebody.
Protected classes an advantage.
It's a violation, in my opinion, of equal protection under the law.
Absolutely.
And so therefore should be unconstitutional. But here we are today. But from Summit.News, UK hospitals to deny care to racist or homophobic patients.
Yeah, see, there you go.
So here's another one, and I won't read the article for the interest of time. I just wanted to touch upon it. From the Washington Examiner, we see U.S. released 375,000 illegal immigrants. And again, they're not immigrants, folks. Immigrants are people who come here illegally, and we have no problem with those types of people. We have no problem with immigrants. We have problems with the aliens, people who come here that don't belong. They don't come the right way. They don't apply for citizenship. Anyway, they say U.S. released 375,000 illegals who entered with family members. They say more than 375,000 of the 473,682 immigrants who were caught illegally crossing the southern border with a family member in fiscal 2019 were released by federal law enforcement. So what does that do? It
incentivizes human trafficking. God,
I thought Trump was going to end catch and release.
We're supposed to believe that the people on the left are so compassionate. It has nothing to do with compassion. It's about letting people that would not qualify otherwise to get into the country.
I thought catch and release was going to be stopped under Trump. Either he's ineffective, or he's just doesn't care. Doesn't really care, despite the rhetoric. I don't know. But here we see from World Net Daily, Democrats now insist they'll investigate president's pardons. I mentioned that earlier. I'm not going to touch upon that anymore. American military news, Missouri man faces 20 years for terrorist plot in support of ISIS. A 20-year sentence and lifetime supervision will deter Robert Lorenzo Hester Jr. and others like him from the clarion call of the Islamic State, federal prosecutors wrote in a memorandum seeking the maximum penalty for a Colombia man who pleaded guilty to aiding terrorists. In opposition to the long sentence, defense attorneys for the 28-year-old who plotted to attack transportation services in Kansas City and other acts over the course of several months argue mental health issues combined with a mockery of his race and intellect by fellow soldiers led him to extremist ideologies. So my question is this more FBI persecution of mental health people to justify their budget? I don't know. But, as we have open borders and as we are releasing those that are arrested for entering the country illegally, we have mentally ill people apparently being arrested. And these are the people we want to lock up. Just outrageous. Did you want to talk about Philip-Haney?
Yeah.
I think that would fit in really good here.
Yeah. Philip-Haney was, and he was a whistleblower.
He worked for the Border Patrol or something, didn't he?
Yeah, Customs and Border Protection, but he actually worked out of an embassy in Saudi Arabia or in the Middle East somewhere. I'm not sure if it was Saudi Arabia or whatever, but he was ordered to issue visas to people who should not have had visas, people who were either criminals or potential terrorists, and he blew the whistle. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if he was forced to retire or if they cordoned him off in some office somewhere where he wasn't really doing anything, but he did eventually retire. And for the past number of years, he wrote a book, and for the past number of years, he's been going around talking to people and telling them about how our now Department of Homeland-Security, it is allowing criminals and terrorists to come into the country. No big surprise there because of the, what we just went through in the last hour.
Yeah.
But anyway, apparently a few days ago he was found murdered.
I believe it was shot in the chest.
Shot in the chest.
Yeah.
And I got an email from Jim Simpson, who has been involved in trying to an education movement to explain to people what's going on with our immigration system and refugee system and how all of it is bringing down the United States. Anyway, he sent out this email talking about the murder of Philip-Haney. Philip-Haney's book that he wrote is called See Something, Say Nothing. A Homeland Security officer exposes the government's submission to jihad.
Yeah, that's a great title, too. See Something, Say Nothing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I got a little sampling. I didn't have time to go through the entire presentation that you emailed me since it was this morning, so it was a late ad, but I'm looking forward to watching his entire presentation. But this is a sampling of Philip-Haney's work.
Why are they doing this, and how did we get to this point where we are today? Isn't everybody curious? How did this all happen? Well, I'll give you one clue. It didn't start with 9/11. It started it's described what the intentions of both the progressive leftists and the global Islamic movement, whose strategy is to implement Sharia law. Ironically enough, you can find the motivation in those red words right from the Declaration of Independence, and that is that they seek to alter or abolish this current form of government. The Founding Fathers wrote this in a benign way to encourage us to stay engaged in our government of, for, and by the people. But the progressive leftists want to either alter it, hope and change, or have allied with people who want to abolish it completely, because according to the self-definition of Sharia law, it opposes all forms of human government. And that includes the U.S. Constitution. There are no exemptions to this dynamic, to this force of gravity that keeps all of the planets in the Islamic solar system orbiting it and in place. So that is where it comes from. And if you build your rebuttal and your strategy on our founding documents by recognizing what they intend to do, which is to alter or abolish our current form of government, it puts you on a solid foundation, immunizing you from a lot of charges of Islamophobic, racist bigotry, because after all, you're defending the documents that our country was founded on. Who is seeking to alter or abolish the U.S. Constitution? Well, let's start with this document right here. Some of you recognize that this is the explanatory memorandum. Up at the top is the word Al-Qaeda in Arabic. Highlighted in the blue box is the phrase that I wrote in English, Al-Qaeda al-Mutsima al-Islamiyya. That was written by the Muslim Brotherhood 10 years before any of us ever heard of Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda is not an organization, it's a concept. And it was formulated and crystallized by the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States as early as 1987. The observant Muslim base is the reason for civilizational and or settlement jihad. That is why they are immigrating to America, to come and coalesce into one solid unit with the intention, and it is intentional, to implement Sharia law, which according to Islamic theology is the grace and gift to mankind. They do not see it as an imposition, but they're not coming here to learn to like hot dogs and apple pie either. It's intentional, based on this concept of the Al-Mutsima, Al-Qaeda, the observant Muslim base. And you can see it in the English portion down below, and that it was authorized by the Shura Council of the Muslim Brotherhood. Within the Islamic, especially Sunni, Salafi, pro-Sharia, pro-Jihad world, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded as a revival organization, Al-Arab Al-Arabiya. That's what Arab Spring is in Arabic, and it doesn't really mean exactly what we think of when we say the Arab Spring. It actually means the revival of the Arab people, as it's characterized in the Quran, that they are the best of all people. And everyone that was a leadership position in that movement in the Middle East said so. All we had to do is listen to what their intentions were. Have we seen this icon before? The white words across the middle from the right is Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin on the left, and the yellow printing on the bottom is Wa'idu, which means prepare. Well, what are they preparing for? Preparing to terrify your enemies. According to Malik, in the Quranic concept of war, every tactic and strategy should be designed to do what it says in the Quran, which is turhibuna, which means to terrify your enemy and defeat them. Actually, the word is slaughter them in warfare. That, my friends, is the icon of the Muslim Brotherhood. The word wa'ayuda comes from Quran 860, called Al-Anfal, the spoils of war, the most violent chapter in the entire Quran. So my first rhetorical question would be, why in the world would an elected government form a formal alliance with an organization whose stated purpose, by the way, do you see any exclusion zones in the earth? And what does it imply with the swords? And by the way, what does the Quran imply? What it implies is that...
Okay, what he's referring to is there is a graphic that he has on the screen of a spinning globe, and in front of the spinning globe, around this spinning globe, are the swords. And so that's what he's referring to. There's no exclusion zones. Basically, what he's getting at here is that this is a religion, quote unquote, that is targeting the entire world, basically. And as you listen to this, the question you have to ask yourself is why is this being promoted? And at a time when, and we know the United States government is working with these groups. They're funding them, they're orchestrating them because they're using them to overthrow governments in the Middle East. They're using them for this purpose. Go ahead, Vicky.
It's worldwide anarchy, and that's what globalization is. It's worldwide anarchy, and there's no such thing as a power vacuum. So it was the opportunity for Islam to come to power to meet their global objective, which is the end of nation states
and civilization as we know it.
Civilization, yes.
Because but the thing is their lifestyle going back to very primitive living is really it's very Agenda 21 compliant, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and one of the, as I recall, one of the leaders in the UN when all of this was being done, or maybe it was the Club of Rome. Anyway, it was a leader of Jordan. And, okay, now, if you look at the economic position of Saudi Arabia, if you get rid of oil, fossil fuel, then what does Saudi Arabia have? That was a way to bring Saudi money, oil money, out to buy up the whole rest of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a symbiotic relationship between, which is really pretty ironic when you think about it, that the oil barons in the Middle East would support getting rid of fossil fuels, which will actually meets the objective of Islam, which is to return to pre-civilization,
Yeah, I don't think so-called fossil fuels are not really from fossils, but
no, they're not. But
so-called
that's
fossil fuels, I don't think they're ever really going to be gotten rid of. This is this.
Well, then no, they can't. I mean,
yeah, you got to have energy, and with all these so-called green energy nonsense, it won't ever produce enough to do what you need to do. So
except that they don't care about us. They don't care whether we have electricity or not.
It gives them the excuse to ration. That's what people need to realize. The whole goal is to control the population. The whole goal is to control you. And if you consider it and look at it and think of it in those terms, you'll understand what the real agenda is.
Right, and there's no better control than poverty. No, there's absolutely no better control than poverty.
This is true. So anyway, I don't know if we're probably about halfway through that clip. I think I'll leave it there. The point is that's Philip-Haney, and he was a homeland-security insider, and now he's dead. He blew the whistle, and now they blew him away. Mm-hmm. That's the sad part about it. So rest in peace, Philip-Haney. All this going on, by the way, when we have the surveillance state for the United States people who are Americans, and they are here and they belong here. We have the city of Hampton. I believe this is in Virginia. City of Hampton installs solar-powered follow-me pole lights. This is from MassPI. What happens when a city receives complaints about unlit walking paths? A typical response to a lack of lighting on walking paths usually means that most cities would add light poles so people could see where they're going. But the city of Hampton, Virginia's response was anything but typical. When 13 News Now reported that Hampton was installing solar-powered light poles along walking paths, I said to myself, good. That is what everyone expected. But then something caught my eye. The light poles the city is installing are being used to monitor traffic and watch sea levels, of all things. And that is when I ask, how can light poles monitor traffic and sea levels unless they become equipped with CCTV cameras? Anyway, this is just part and parcel of the technocratic surveillance state that we're seeing go up everywhere. This particular thing, this person writing said they were able to discover that Clear World LLC is responsible for helping police turn the city of Hampton into a Chinese-style surveillance city.
Right, that's the goal. That's the objective, is the surveillance state. And with everything that's going on in the country in terms of technology, there's the top side where they talk about what they're doing and they put the rosy picture on it. And then there, which is the surveillance state, the police state, the recording of data, the monitoring everything that you do. So you really have to look at the whole big picture of what's being done, including the top side and the underside. Mm-hmm. And it's the same, it's cookie cutter. We've talked about this before. It's cookie cutter everywhere.
So let's talk about free market, what's called free market economics. You wrote an article, Surrender of the Economy and Its Consequences, where you talked about Greenspan and Reagan. You want to dive right in and why did you decide to do that?
What I did.
Go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah. What I did is I'm constantly going back in history to find when something started. You know, I'll see a reference and then I will go research it back in history so that I can then follow it forward. Well, I was doing that one day. I found a video of Ron Brown, who was the Commerce Secretary that was murdered in, Croatia? But anyway, I noticed that I went back and looked for other programs that were done by the sponsor of that program. So, and it was sponsored by the American Stock Exchange. So I went looking for all programs on C-SPAN that were done by the American Stock Exchange. And I found this appearance by Alan Greenspan in 1990 that was really a mind blower, because for a time there in the 1990s, Alan Greenspan was the most powerful man in the world. When Greenspan spoke, everybody stopped and listened. And so this program that I found in 1990 really gave the essence of what he was thinking about before we entered into this era of the internet and so-called free market economics and all of that. So I consider it to be one of the most important.
Yeah,
found.
I've got a minute and a half clip from that presentation. If you want me to play it, I don't know if this is what the part that you want heard, but I tried to get the salient points. Again, Alan Greenspan on October 1990.
One of the things I think we are observing is a extraordinary media blitz at the moment on the Persian Gulf, on oil prices, on the budget, fiscal policy, and the like. And I sense it's almost too soon to be distracted from one, if not the most profoundly important event of the second half of the 20th century. That is the transition of the centrally planned economies of the Soviet Union and its Eastern European allies towards market systems. When Winston Churchill in Fulton, Missouri, in 1946 defined, or in one sense announced, the falling of the Iron Curtain across Central Europe, he was also talking about an unprecedented experiment in economic theory, which, while not something any of us were aware of at the time, was being put into place. For more than 4 decades, centrally planned economies evolved to the east and market economies to the west of the so-called Iron Curtain. It was basically as close to a laboratory experiment in social science that one could conceivably construct.
Okay, I don't know. Did that capture what you wanted it to capture?
Yes, it did. The fact that they considered it an experiment, and it was an experiment. You know, we didn't realize it. Greenspan said he didn't realize it, but I'll guarantee you what, the British Empire, the Commonwealth, did. And which is the significance of Greenspan mentioning Winston Churchill's speech in Fulton, Missouri, in 1946. And if you then, if you listen to everything that Greenspan said, and you listen to everything that Winston Churchill said, you can see the beginning of the promotion of the idea of the common market.
Yeah,
and what I realized when I was doing this work, that what they called free market economics was actually common market economics, which meant separation of the economy from the political state.
Yeah, and that's key right there, because we hear everywhere the term free trade, for instance. And free trade, the elimination of tariffs and that sort of thing is being promoted as freedom. And this whole, there shouldn't be any restrictions on businesses that go international and ship international. And this is all in the realm of the libertarian camp, where they're pushing for all of this. And this is part of the reason why I say libertarians are globalists. They just don't know it. Many of them.
And so if you separate the economy from the nation state, then you've cut the legs out from under it. You have disempowered your nation state, and you have empowered what essentially has become a global mafia of oligarchs.
Yeah, very well said.
Right? Mm-hmm. So that's why this speech is so important. It's only what? It's only about 35 minutes long. And since it's Alan Greenspan, you've got to listen to it about 3 times, because he is just painfully boring.
Yeah. Well, he's an economist. They're not exactly the life of the party, I don't think, usually.
No, but
that's a broad statement, I guess.
Easier, but when you follow the timeline of Alan Greenspan, he was first appointed to be on the Council of Economic Advisors for Gerald Ford. Mm-hmm. And
you know what? We're at the break. Hold that thought, Gerald Ford. We'll be back here, folks. Stay with us.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is hour number 3 of Govern America. Vicky Davis is here. I'm Darren Weeks, and it continues to be the 22nd of February, 2020. Too many twos, I think. Wow. Anyway, we're talking about Vicky's new article, Surrender of the Economy and Its Consequences, in this hour, as well as we continue from the last hour. And in this, she writes, on October 10th, 1987, Senator Bill Bradley gave a stunning statement for one who grew up in the Cold War era at the East-West Institute concerning U.S.-Soviet relations. The punchline of Bradley's remarks were that they wanted to open up Western capital markets to the Soviets. Now, I do have some of that audio, too, if you, whenever you're ready for it, Vicky.
Sure, play it.
Okay. This is... this is a good piece of article or audio here. This is again.
Right, but let's say first, though, that the Berlin Wall did not come down until 1989. So as far as everybody in the country was concerned, the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union, a communist country, and the East Germany was still intact and part of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was in control of all of it under communist rule. So,
okay, again, Senator Bill Bradley, October 10th, 1987.
For the West to be confident that Gorbachev brings the prospect of a new day, we'll need to see tangible progress in reducing military threats and political repression. We can't let perestroika, glasnost, and symmetry, however encouraging, obscure the fact that the issues that have troubled our relationship with the Soviets in the past seem to be unchanged. At the same time, we have to be flexible enough to seize new opportunities and to have antennae sensitive enough to hear the soft inner voice of the Soviet Union, as well as to pick up its threat.
The soft inner voice of the Soviet Union.
That blew me away. I mean, that was the...
Wow. Talk about
as
delusional.
If communists have a soft inner voice.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man.
But anyway, so what they wanted to do, and apparently what they did, was open up Western capital markets, meaning our banks and our stock market, to the Soviet Union.
Yep.
And allowing American investors to go over and invest in communist countries.
All right, you want me to continue?
Yeah, well, other than to say one thing, the stock market was the capital allocation mechanism for the American economy. So it wasn't the money of the government or the money of the stock market. It was the money of American businesses, American pension funds, the American people. And that money was supposed to serve to build our economy.
Yeah. What we're talking about here is the formation of a new world order, the groundwork that has been laid to open up the entire, because we hear all the time, every 4th of July I say the same thing. When they talk about Independence Day, I say, this is an obsolete holiday because everywhere you turn, you hear how interdependent our economy is, how interdependent everything is. And it wasn't always that way, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we're talking about here, is when they were laying the foundations for entangling us around the world with every other country.
Right. And you know what hurts my heart is that it occurred in my lifetime. My generation was on the front lines of observing and helping it happen, and that hurts me.
But your generation had no idea that it was even taking place.
That's true.
And
that's
there
true.
was no internet back then. And, that's the thing, is that it's real easy to blame people, innocent victims of the conspiracy. But the reality is, without information really is power. And that's why, it's remarkable today that we have so much information at our fingertips. It's just now the problem is they flooded us with so much disinformation in addition to genuine information that it's difficult to know where to begin. What's what? Anyway.
That's true. Okay. Now, this is really, in this article, it's a demonstration of why going back in history through the timeline is really important. Because we have Alan Greenspan being appointed to the Federal Reserve in 1987, in August of 1987. Bill Bradley's speech at the East-West Soviet Relations was on October 10th, 1987. And then Black Monday, the day that Wall Street stopped, was on October 19th, 1987.
Yeah, I remember Black Monday. I was 7 years old at the time. But I do remember.
I was an adult, and I remember it, really well. But, okay, here's what I wrote when I found out about, when I was researching Black Monday, which, was years ago when I was trying to, when I was looking at Greenspan, I wrote, on October 19th, 1987, in a day and a half, the stock market lost over $1 trillion of valuation when market specialists, which means the Goldman Sachs, the Lehman Brothers, the Morgan Stanleys, refused to step in and make the market. There were sellers, but there were no buyers, and that's what's meant by making the market, is that those Wall Street firms, they back the market to make sure that there is always a buyer for all the sellers.
Yeah.
Okay, after a day and a half of staggering losses, the Federal Reserve stepped in to back the market, opening up the U.S. Treasury to Wall Street. And that's when really the Fed took over control of the market with the Open Market Committee. Of course, it took a number of years to get that all in place. But as I was putting this together, the question that came to my mind was, in the book Atlas Shrugged, there was John Galt. The question was the Black Monday John Galt's strike? Bringing the economy to a halt so that they could then, do what they wanted to, basically, because they were supposed to be the economic leaders, the allocation of capital and whatever, except that what Bill Bradley had said was that, they were opening up our market to the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, and first of all, I have to correct myself. I was 17 years old at the time of Black Monday. It was 1987, not 77. But, and as far as Black Monday being, you got to keep in mind the words, everyone has to keep in mind the words of Rahm Emanuel.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Yeah, and that's...
Right. And if you don't have a naturally occurring crisis, you make one.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
And that's the idea of the strike. They made one.
Yep, that's it. So I do have the audio from Reagan when he appointed Greenspan, too. I don't know if you want to get that, but we can continue with Bradley first.
Well, no, go ahead and play the...
Whichever direction you want to go. What do you want me to play?
Yeah, play the Greenspan, or the Reagan.
Okay, we'll play Reagan. All right, this is Reagan as when he appointed Alan Greenspan. The comments.
Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Alan Greenspan back to official service to his country. I say official service because even in private life, Alan Greenspan has again and again devoted his time and talents to public service. Chairman of President Ford's Council of Economic Advisors, member of 3 presidential commissions, including the Greenspan Commission, frequent witness before congressional committees, guest lecturer at New York University, member of the Board of Overseers of the Hoover Institution, and the list goes on and on. Now, in becoming chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Alan is making perhaps the most dramatic personal sacrifice of his career, taking his name down from the door of Townsend Greenspan, the firm he guided as president and chairman for nearly 30 years. Since its creation in 1913, the Federal Reserve System with its Board of Governors has become one of the central institutions of our government. Charged with maintaining the soundness of the banking system, the Fed helps to make possible the many millions of financial transactions that take place in America every day, from the purchase of stocks and bonds on Wall Street to the purchase of groceries on Main Street. But perhaps the Fed is best known for its conduct of monetary policy, managing the rate of growth and the supply of money. How the Fed performs this job directly affects vital economic factors: inflation, interest rates, the overall rate of economic expansion itself. Under the chairmanship of Paul Volcker, the Fed has used its monetary policy to overcome the rampant inflation that had grown up during the late 1970s. What we're aiming for, Chairman Volcker once said, is a situation in which people can proceed about their business without worrying about what prices are going to do.
And how have they done? I don't think they've done very well, have they?
Well, no, he blew a hole in a...
He blew
and trying to reinflate it is like pouring water into a bucket with holes in it. You pour more money in, but it just flows out. And that's because we don't have a pool anymore. The United States is not a pool because of free market economics, which means common market.
Well, central banking is the source of all monetary inflation anyway. I mean, let's start there. You know, the whole fractional reserve banking system is the source of all of this. So, the criminals are in charge of policing the economy. I mean, they put them in charge of everything. Anyway.
Well, it really wouldn't matter if it was all within the United States, but they opened up our banking system, to the world and unleashed the banks. The banks were deregulated, and I'm not sure exactly when that deregulation started, but I think it might have began when they, in 1983, when they passed the legislation to create that international zone on the border.
La Paz?
Because the banks going down into Mexico was a big part of that. American banks, American capital to build Mexico.
You're talking about the La Paz agreement?
Yes.
Yeah, the U.S.-Mexican border agreement. By the way, you were talking about Black Monday a moment ago. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was the beginning of the President's Working Group on Financial Markets.
Yeah, I think that's called the Open Market Committee.
The Plunge Protection Team is what it's called, too.
Yeah, same, one and the same.
So they manipulate the markets to prevent crashes like Black Monday. So, I don't know how anybody can make an argument for free markets when everything across the board is manipulated from beginning to end.
Well, free markets, they use the term, it's like sustainable development.
Yeah.
When we use the term, we have one thing in mind, but when they use the term, it's something different. And it was a revelation to me that the free market economics didn't mean just, our idea of the merchant in the street selling to the person on the street. That isn't what they meant. They meant expanding or actually eliminating the borders on our economy.
A lot of times the way they put it is eliminating obstacles to trade.
They always put it in language.
Sounds good.
That you can't just take it at the language that they use at face value using your definitions of the words. You have to know what they're talking about. Right. And the only way you can find out what they're talking about is to listen to them in other arenas, other spheres, other places, and read what they say in those other places. Which is why that C-SPAN segment, it was a revelation to me. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about Greenspan, you kind of did a little background on Greenspan and the fact that he was heavily influenced by Ayn Rand. I know you referenced Atlas Shrugged earlier. I have a little, that Frontline piece. Do you want me to share that clip with people?
Yeah, okay. I do.
Okay,
because go ahead.
Well, this gives a little background as to how he was influenced by Ayn Rand, because what we're talking about here is libertarianism, for one thing, and this philosophy where, you should have everything be open, because here's the thing: when we argue against so-called free markets, Vicky, we're kind of facing an uphill fight in the freedom. I almost used the word community. It's not community, because honestly, community implies like-mindedness. And there's so much scattered opinions about various things in this patriot effort or this freedom-minded. And I think there's a lot of well-meaning people that are involved in this. But libertarians, it's a globalist philosophy. It really is.
Yeah. Well, Ayn Rand says it in that clip. And that's a really, really important clip.
Okay, let's go ahead. This is Frontline. I don't know when they aired this, but it was back quite a while, where they're talking about Alan Greenspan and Ayn Rand's influence on him.
In his 18 years as Fed chairman, he applied those
5 presidents had watched Alan Greenspan work his magic. It started back in the Ford administration.
Alan Greenspan was a financial consultant who was hired by Jerry Ford, first to be head of his Council of Economic Advisors in the 70s.
But Alan Greenspan was not your stereotypical economist.
He was also very charming and a man about Washington.
He played jazz clarinet, had made himself rich on Wall Street, and he had embraced an unusual political guru,
challenging the moral code of altruism.
The libertarian philosopher Ayn Rand.
Everybody is enslaved to everybody.
Greenspan is a disciple. She is the great champion of government as a destructive force that just gets in the way.
Mike Wallace, Ayn Rand, 225-1.
I've practiced it all my life.
Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy?
I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. Let me put it briefly. I'm for the separation of state and economics.
Greenspan talked about Rand in his autobiography.
Ayn Rand became a stabilizing force in my life. It hadn't taken long for us to have a meeting of the minds, mostly my mind meeting hers.
So where I was going with that earlier, when we talk about, we're talking against so-called free markets. But when you apply the definition that you were just saying, what they really mean when they say free markets are common markets. What these libertarian types seem to be pushing is this whole idea that there shouldn't be any restriction whatsoever on any commerce, on any movement of people, on any movement of corporations. They should be able to ship to whomever they want. Everything should be completely unregulated and uncontrolled.
That legislation that you talked about, the new way forward, what does that do?
It does the same thing.
Exactly.
Yes. Good point. Very good point. Because so it's not hard to see when you really consider complete, absolute, devoid of regulation, devoid of any kind of bureaucratic intervention, devoid of any kind of legislative intervention. What you have is exactly what the globalists want. They want complete flow of everything. And so you don't really need borders either, because borders are in the way of the free flow of everything.
In the way of mobster oligarchs gaining all of the money and all of the power. So you disempower government and you empower criminal oligarchs.
Yeah.
And they are criminal because they do whatever it takes to make their money. You know what? People have the idea that people like Bloomberg and all these billionaires that they made their money squeaky clean. And I'm telling you right now that in business, when you're talking about lots of money, it's not squeaky clean.
Yeah,
it isn't. So
well, and I can't stress this enough. I'm all for free market capitalism. I'm all for
don't use that word, please.
Capitalism.
Don't say free market.
Well, I'm for the free market in terms of having freedom to do commerce freely.
In our country.
I don't want a centrally planned economy, is what I'm saying. I don't like things to be centrally planned. I don't like communism. And it's sad that you have to make that distinction. But when you're arguing against something, they've done a good job at defining terms and shifting focus. But when you realize that what they define as free markets are common markets, as you've pointed out, you're talking about globalism.
Right. Well, and the way to think about it is think about the neighborhood that you live in. If you have a homeowners association and somebody comes up with the suggestion of
of a what?
For a common market for your little neighborhood.
Okay.
Where you give up control of your own money and you just let the homeowners association decide where the money goes. You lose control of your economic life. You lose control of your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Got a call on the line. Let's go ahead and take the call, and we'll continue talking about this article. Hello, caller. You're on the air from Texas.
Hello, Darren and Vicky, too, here in Texas.
Hi.
What you just said, Vicky, about homeowner association, that was the analogy I was trying to draw last week with Sam Bass and his tombstone. People come by chip away. After a while, there was no tombstone left, and that's where our freedoms are going. They chip away a little bit here and a little bit there, and first thing you know, it's like the old cow that's sticking her head through the fence trying to get a bite of grass, and after a while she looks up and she's on the other side of the fence. She wonders how she got there. But anyway, old country boy analogies there. Dr. No. Good old Ron Paul, the representative from Texas that voted, had a record, almost a perfect record of voting no on just about everything that went through the U.S. House of Representatives.
Except for most favored nation, trading status for communist China. Sorry, I had to point that out. Go ahead.
I do what now?
I said except for voting most favored nation trading status for communist China, which he did repeatedly.
Well, it's all part of the philosophy of end of government. End of government. That was what Ron Paul, his position was, to make government as small as possible.
Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
He counted himself as a libertarian. He ran on the Republican ticket, but he claimed himself to be a libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that's a catch now. And one day I decided I'd look up the libertarian platform.
Yep.
And was I up for a rude awakening?
Yeah, me too.
Talking about the libertarian. It's not all it's cracked up to be. It's and I just wonder how many people really know what the true platform of the libertarian is.
Well, as I recall, it's for open borders. And that's the thing is I read it on the show. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? In my early years, after 2000, in my early years on the internet, there were all these people sponsored by the Koch brothers who were arguing for free trade. Well, once I figured out what free trade was, I then had to argue against free trade. But how do you argue against freedom?
Yeah. And that's the problem. That's exactly why they call it that.
Exactly why.
It's marketing.
Yeah. Here is the deal. I raised animals for market, goats primarily,
mm-hmm.
and I take them to a sale. And I may have mentioned this on your show before. There are order buyers there, and there's buyers that come through and buy these animals. And they know the market at each auction sale. They may buy those animals and run them through 2 or 3 sales, jacking up the price every time they take them before they deliver them to the buyer that really put in the order.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way our stock market is. You got the day traders. I'm sorry, day traders. And you've got the people that works on COMEX, the futures, on everything you can imagine, from our food to, pork bellies, grain.
Okay, hey, Jerry, hold on just a second. I'll hold you over the break. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back in just a moment.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
All right, we're in the home stretch of the broadcast, final half hour of the show. In Vicky Davis's article, Surrender of the Economy and Its Consequences, which is up on thetechnocratictyranny.com right now, listeners. She says, in effect, common market economics, which they deceptively called free market economics, was the surrender of our economy to outside forces. The shared economic system meant not only money and business leaving the country, it meant foreign money, foreign businesses, and foreign workers coming in. And this really seems to be the theme of the show today. For foreign investors, she says, to come in, they needed information about the economic pool of the United States. And that's how Bloomberg made his money, apparently, and now he's trying to buy the political system as well. This turned information into a commodity in the United States, and we all know the impact that has had. Loss of privacy, loss of businesses as they became targets, and the list goes on. So anyway, continuing on here, we're discussing the article and the agenda. Right now we have Jerry on the line from Texas. Jerry, real quickly, go ahead and finish your thoughts, please.
It's just, Vicky, I think, and by the way, I apologize. I was going to address y'all as pod people. Y'all were, I love that. But let's get in our pods and be nice. But it's designed for a few to steal everybody's wealth. And basically, I think, Vicky, I could say that back in the 80s, they had taken all the wealth that they could from the U.S. citizens, and they were figuring out a way to dip in the jar on the other nations and open it up. And I don't know. I don't know where it's going to end, but us little guys, we don't stand a snowball's chance. If we're lucky to get 3 square meals a day and stay warm and cool, I guess we're count our blessings.
Yeah.
But
I agree with that. I don't know where it's going to either, but I do know that if people don't begin to understand the systems that allowed it all to happen, how it happened over time, what the objective was, and the systems that allowed it to happen. I was thinking about it, and it's kind of like everybody studies the fish, but what I look at is the fish tank. And so if they don't begin to understand the fish tank, then we'll never solve these problems, because if you arrest one oligarch here and one person there, you don't fix the system. You take out one of the fish, but the whole tank that's still exists.
Yeah. Hey, Jerry, I'm going to let you go since we're short on time, but thank you for your call, sir.
Good weekend.
Always good hearing from you. Let's... I don't know if you want to. There's a number of different directions we can go with this. You talked about opportunity zones in here. We can play more audio from Senator Bradley if you want.
Well, let me talk about this for a minute.
Okay.
Okay. From this program, the insight that I got into Greenspan was when he said that he was learning economics. The prevailing opinion was that central planning and economy was a superior method, and free market economics was virtually unknown. Okay, and at some point he evolved into the recognition of free market economics. Well, when he said that was a big clue. You know, if free market economics was not economic theory at the time when he was going to school, which was in the 1950s, then it was an evolved idea. And with his relationship with Ayn Rand and his being hired by Gerald Ford, that has to be when the new idea evolved. And Gerald Ford is the one that appointed him to the Council on Economic Advisors. And when I was looking at Gerald Ford, which I did because Gerald Ford signed the Helsinki Final Act, which is probably the most important agreement that the U.S. ever signed that nobody ever heard of.
Yep.
But it was for cooperation and mutual assistance with the Eastern Bloc countries. Okay, and the Helsinki Commission is in business still to this day with a focus on human rights. Right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, but what happened during the Ford administration is that Ford first appointed Nelson Rockefeller to be his vice president, and the first thing Rockefeller did was to set up central economic planning for the whole economy. And but it was Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney who orchestrated a coup to get rid of Nelson Rockefeller, because otherwise we would have had a centrally planned economy going way back then. Mm-hmm. But Alan Greenspan was on that committee at the time when, let's see, and I guess he stayed on the committee. I'm not exactly sure, but he was almost like an anointed one, you know, going in and out of government, making recommendations, and so I think his power, the beginning point during the Ford administration, when the Council on Economic Advisors was being set up. Okay, now that all occurred at the time, at the beginning of the information age. So I'm sure that Alan Greenspan's activities probably involved consulting, and what you could do with computer systems in the way of economics, because they're really very important for financial management. They're absolutely essential for financial management, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and so these you talk about the role of Ford and the CEA, the Council of Economic Advisors, and the CEA records. The collection is a rich resource documenting the direct involvement of the CEA, the Council of Economic Advisors, in economic policy making, contacts with business leaders, lobbyists, and economists from universities, federal agencies, and international organizations. The work of interagency groups and the Council detailed research on micro and macroeconomic policy issues. The records document CEA analysis and policy recommendations in such areas as agricultural and food policy, housing construction, environmental and energy policy, supplies of strategic materials, exploitation of ocean resources, management of timber resources, transportation problems and policies, functioning of the labor market and problems of the unemployed, proposals for health insurance and income maintenance, and needed improvements in government economic statistics. As I read this, Vicky, how is it that this is, they're calling it free markets, okay? They're calling it free markets. This is a planned economy. It is, but it's planned at the infrastructure level. When people think of central plan, well, our country has done a lot to hide the fact that it's central planning. But when you look at the opportunity zones and the environmental programs and the HUD programs and the Health and Human Services programs, all of those are central planning. Mm-hmm. They're all government programs. Yeah. The money, we really don't pay attention much, how the federal money flows into our local communities. But in effect, our federal government has bought our local communities through economic development money. And when you set the parameters of a program, you're basically saying how that money is going to be used. Well, that's central planning. Yeah. It doesn't make any difference whether the name of the park that you're giving money to is Julia Davis Park or whether it's Central Park or whatever. The money is allocated for parks. That's central planning. Yeah. Because a park is a park is a park. It's going to be a park. Yeah. So they made the case for bringing Western capital and bringing the facilitating the flow of money, East-West cooperation and that sort of thing. The need for Western capital to flow into the Soviet Union. Senator Bradley did that. Did you want to hear some more of the audio or play some more?
Yeah, go ahead.
An effective Western strategy must have an economic as well as a military component. The Soviet Union's precarious economic circumstances and Gorbachev's domestic reform are the source of two new ironies. The first is that the General Secretary can't accomplish his domestic priorities unless the West is doing well economically. To import technology, he must raise cash by borrowing more from the West or by exporting more to the West. Whether he relies on Western capital markets or Western export markets, he'll benefit from a healthy Western economy. So a serious economic downturn could doom Gorbachev's modernization plans. This degree of economic interdependence is new. It challenges the fundamental principle of autarky upon which the Soviet security, military success, and political relations with the outside world have been based since the revolution. It gives the Soviets an unprecedented stake in Western growth. The second irony stems from the dependence of Gorbachev's reforms on the dramatic increase in domestic investment. He needs to invest in many things: intensive agricultural irrigation, in energy development, especially after Chernobyl, in machinery to offset a declining population and to raise labor productivity. And he needs to produce consumer goods that his people can see and want. The needed investment capital must come either from a reduction in Soviet military spending or from financial markets in the West. They'll probably need both. An international environment with less tension could accelerate the reductions in military spending that successful reform will require. There's even an economic rationale for Soviet military cuts. The Soviet Union will be most creditworthy if it frees resources from defense and puts them to work increasing Soviet productivity and improving living standards. But Gorbachev appears to believe that more resources are not enough, that there's got to be systemic reform, because more resources alone can't guarantee high levels of growth. But implementation of his far-reaching program, announced in the June plenum, will be opposed at each step. In the best of circumstances, reform will take longer than expected. In the worst of circumstances, it'll be killed. And as opposition grows and pressure builds, access to Western capital markets will become crucial.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are so many contradictions in what he said. Gorbachev did have lots of plans for reforms, but all he really needed was a guarantee that the U.S. wouldn't, or NATO wouldn't invade them while they reduced their military troops, and he would have had plenty of money to invest in the domestic economy. So what Bradley was saying there was that he needed Western capital, and then that would, give him incentive to disarm or to reduce military forces. Well, while all that was going on, the Secretary of State, George Shultz, was over there talking to Gorbachev about information systems and how in the future the military forces weren't going to be as useful as information systems, because with satellites and information systems, you could, see what was going on in other countries. And so,
well, this whole idea.
He convinced Gorbachev that information systems were really the key to the future.
This whole idea that Western capital had to flow into the Soviet Union, this was about the time the Soviet Union collapsed or right before it. Yet they're pushing these ideas, and it's interesting to me that the Western capital that flowed in was largely the capital from the private banks and companies that were there to loot and buy up all the infrastructure, basically steal the country out from under the Russian people.
Right, because the economy was separated from the state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mean. It's a strategy for disintegration of the nation state. And what happened over there is what happened here. Except that, in the United States, people were not as accustomed to government control and to being oppressed as they were over there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they were oppressed over there.
Yeah,
it's the government.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting that way, but all the money that flowed in basically bought up all of the state enterprises and left the state virtually powerless, which is when Putin stepped in.
Right, exactly.
And said, enough of this.
Exactly. And that is exactly the reason why we have all this anti-Russian stuff going on today, is because they want it all back to where it was before.
Right, to where they could continue to
oligarch
exploit
rule
until they have everything, until they have absolutely everything. Yeah. And it's like an evolutionary process. You know, as you empower oligarchs to loot the economy, when people, the middle class and the lower classes all fall into poverty, then you get anger and unrest, and it looks like a revolution. And politicians stepping in with programs that turn out to be centrally planned programs to mollify or try to mitigate the loss of economic activity because your economy has been looted.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a step-by-step process for bringing the country into a centrally planned communist system, ultimately, after it goes through these stages of disintegration.
Yep. Continuing on here.
That's why the West, while not overstating its importance, should treat its capital as a strategic asset and develop a plan and set of conditions for its flow eastward.
There you go. Now, he talks about the plan for bringing the Soviet Union into the international finance system.
Absent any kind of plan, results could be inconsistent with the West's strategic interest. As a beginning, let me suggest that the flow of Western capital to the Soviet Union should be limited and proportionate with the degree of systemic reform. Perhaps by bringing the Soviet Union into the international financial system, we would be able to establish some criteria for the provision of loans based on the progress of reform. In the present circumstance, there's no discipline and no accountability for bankers' actions. For example, in 1985, the Soviet Union owed about $29 billion, including $6 billion of new borrowing. They'd like to issue euro notes and bonds and other marketable securities. By 1990, their indebtedness is projected to increase substantially, with most of the new money coming from West European and Japanese sources.
West European and Japanese sources.
Yes, Germany and Japan. And it was in my section on the global transportation system, Germany and Japan. And it's almost like they teamed up again. You know, it was Germany and Japan that we were fighting in World War II, and it's almost like they were teaming up again, only this time for an economic war.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
All that's really interesting. But what Greenspan did in this talk is that he did a comparative analysis and the differences between a totally centrally planned communist system like they had in the Soviet Union and our system. And the biggest difference was in accounting systems and in the financial analysis that Western corporations went through to gain more efficiency. In the communist countries, efficiency really wasn't an issue because the government was funding everything. And they didn't have the concept of depreciation, which meant that they kept their equipment until it basically fell apart. So you didn't have any refresh of equipment for greater efficiency. So what he said was that the Soviet economy was basically stalled in time in the 1950s, which it's really an interesting thing to go through that thought process of what would be the difference between central planning and what we had as a capitalist system, because at the point in time when Greenspan was appointed, we basically did have a capitalist system modified somewhat because you have big problems, in your city areas and things. So to have a civilized society, you do have to have organization to your society on some level.
Yeah.
But the issue is to what degree, where does the government draw the line in central planning, allowing the people to the freedom to make their own way in the world, but still provide a framework where they can do it.
It dawns on me that the Constitution provides the federal government has the right to regulate interstate commerce. And I was talking about that one day, and I got an email from a gentleman who, he made the point, and I think it was a very good point, that what that really is talking about is to facilitate, to help encourage interstate commerce, not to regulate it in the sense that it puts restrictions on it, but to encourage, to help facilitate, to help make it possible. Because that was one of the big issues before the Constitution came along, when we were under the Articles of Confederation for Perpetual Union, was the conflicts between the states. And there was talk even that there could be wars between the states, over certain issues. So the whole idea was to encourage, trade, but the regulations should help facilitate it. And now we've had this whole idea perverted to the point where, every regulation that, to suggest that there shouldn't be any regulation of markets, to suggest there shouldn't be any regulation of corporations, that lends itself to the empowerment of the people that are most prone to abuse the power. It gives them more power.
That's 100% correct.
It gives power to the people who are prone to abuse power, and it takes power away from people who are most vulnerable to that abuse. And that's what we're talking about trying to prevent here.
If you're living in a community and the owners of the businesses are your neighbors, they're a lot more likely to care about your well-being as they do their business than some guy who lives in a Manhattan penthouse.
Yeah.
Who only deals and does business with other people who live in that small area in Manhattan or Washington, D.C. or wherever.
Yeah.
Out here where, who cares, whether they import drugs from, like heparin, from China, and some people die. They consider that cost of doing business.
Yeah, collateral damage.
Collateral damage. Not a big deal.
Okay.
Not to them.
Final clip from Bradley.
Finally, in addition to economic and military components, a Western strategy must include a political and ideological component as well. We should never hesitate to point out the Soviet Union's shortcomings on human rights, for they will never hesitate to point out our shortcomings. But at the same time, we have to be attuned to the possibility of change even in the Soviet Union. Exploiting opportunities and providing incentives to move European security and U.S.-Soviet relations to a new ground will be one of the most important challenges for the next administration, whether Democrat or Republican. U.S. leadership should emphasize a combination of an unyielding adherence to the ideals of political liberty and a receptivity to the possibility of political reform in the Soviet Union. We're at the beginning of a process that may hold great promise. But to realize that promise, we have to plan our approach carefully, not as a unilateral American exercise, but in genuine consultation with our allies. The challenge and opportunity of the next few years is not just to improve U.S.-Soviet relations. It's to work with our allies and with the Soviets to build a new security framework for Europe and the world, and to achieve what has eluded us for so long, a lasting peace.
A new security framework. That's what they want. That's really the punchline of all of it.
The technocratic tyranny. That's the new security framework, is the police state, the global police state. If they watch everything you do, they have security.
Yeah, and you don't. Congratulations. Right. Yeah, there you go. On that positive note, ladies and gentlemen, we're leaving you again. Thank you for being with us. I know for myself, I'm going to stay tuned to that soft Soviet voice. Just kidding. Yeah. Just kidding.
That should have been the big giveaway, you know.
All right, God bless you, folks. Thank you for being with us. And join us back here next week. And tell a friend. God bless you, folks. Bye-bye. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Darren.